is.
Yeah.
So hopefully this is the last time I will have to ask about this. Looking past over the year past, how did COVID affect things in the schools last year?
Yeah. So in general, I think, we need to acknowledge that the challenges that existed were beyond the school division. So, I just want to start with that. I think in general, our society had lots of challenges to overcome, and the school division is just one part of that. From a school division standpoint, if I were to make a general statement, I think we fared quite well. If I look at all the people that impacted in our system, starting with our students who were there to serve, our students were amazing. They were resilient. They showed how flexible and how quickly they could adapt. It was really kind of amazing to watch. And then, that next layer of our staff, I'm thankful and so impressed our staff, even during challenging time, kept the best interest of our kids at the forefront in that. So, we went through times when we were full regular learning. Over the last couple years, we were in full remote learning. We were in hybrid systems where some kids were at home, some kids were at our schools, alternating days where some kids were there, some kids weren't. And then on top of that, things that were completely foreign to us, like sanitization stations and masks and rapid testing of our staff and our kids, offering that kind of stuff. The next layer, our parents. Our parents are always critical in our education system. But during COVID, that even ramped up more. Obviously, when your kids are at home in periods of remote learning, the responsibility on parents is amplified. They were fantastic. They were patient. They were great with us. And then our communities at large. They were just real supportive of our school system. So I think we came through fairly good. The reality is difficult situations don't determine who we are. It's how we handle those difficult situations. And we went through it with the mindset it's always the right time to do the right thing for our kids. And although it was tough and it's challenging, our data sets would show that our kids, that there wasn't a lot of learning loss. Although there's lots of talk about all this learning loss, I would say that academically our kids did okay. That doesn't mean there isn't challenges there that we have to address as they come back. Maybe the bigger challenge is kind of the social loss and the loss of some of our kids that went through 2 years, maybe in their grade 11, 12 years, and didn't get to do sports programs, for instance. Like that's a big loss to kids. So I think our job as a system now is to continue to build trust with our communities, continue to work to ensure everybody's doing well. And our mindset has been never to pass judgment. Let's figure out where our people are at, meet them where they're at, and then help them get to where they need to be. So that's our overarching mindset.
So are there any, one of the big things about last year was the inconsistency. There was regulations, policies changed day to day, sometimes week to week.
Yes.
By the end of last year, were things sort of back to everything? You were able to do all the programs you wanted to be doing, or were there still things at the end of last year where you were kind of shut down and waiting for the next year?
Yeah, I would say we weren't fully ramped up at the end of last year. We were definitely a lot closer. We had all our kids in school attending full time. We had our extracurricular programs were back rolling. With that said, it looked a little different. The number of kids we were putting on a bus, for instance, the overnight stays and some of those things were a little different. Yeah. So we were working more to ensure we could control the environment a little more than maybe we typically would. We know that can change going into this year, but as of right now, we had a meeting this week with Manitoba Education and Manitoba Health, and the plan is to start the full year kind of normal, so to speak. Yeah. With that said, keeping in mind all the things we learned from the pandemic that are just good practices. Yeah. And so we'll continue to have sanitization stations as you enter our buildings. Yeah. We'll continue to make those things available in classrooms. Probably just a good practice. Yeah. But we anticipate starting the year kind of full academic programming, full-time in learning, full extracurricular options for our kids with no restrictions, so to speak,
Yeah.
or specific things. Obviously, if somebody wants to do something that they did during COVID, we'll respect that and support that, but we won't be implementing those to start the school year.
Are you finding a lot of the people who maybe did at-home learning are coming back into the school towards the end of last year, this year?
Yeah, we saw pockets of it in some communities where people, for whatever reasons, were choosing to keep their kids home. Some of those reasons were people were unhappy with some of the provincial mandates, for instance, mask wearing. They weren't happy, so they chose to keep their kids home. In some situations, those were, there's people in the household that are at medical risk, and they didn't want to take that chance. So I would say we're starting to field lots of questions from some of our community about, what's it going to look like for masks, and some of those things. And for sure, even at the end of last year, we had about 100 kids that were out of our system for a while, and we probably have more than half of those back at the end of last year.
Yeah.
And we know that a large number of those have said to us this year, we plan to come back. So for sure, we're seeing that trickle back into our system.
Yeah. And this may not be something you can answer, but just on the topic of, extracurriculars coming back, sports coming back, there really weren't any, some of those sports did not happen at all. How is that sort of affecting sports, leagues, sports teams, things like that? Has there been a sort of a cascading effect through that?
Not a huge impact, I don't think. Like, we haven't seen any leagues shut down or completely change their rules.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think for sure we'll see, it'll be interesting to see how we start. Will we see this huge demand of kids really needing that, so we see our numbers grow in those?
Yeah.
Or will we see kids that have taken 2 years where they really haven't had that, or at least a full year where they haven't had that, and now they're withdrawn a bit? We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
Like, the only extracurricular program that's kind of in our system right now that's fully practicing is our football program at Neepawa Collegiate.
Right. Yeah.
And we haven't seen a decline there. So
Okay.
I guess that's a good sign.
I know one of the bigger challenges was in the music program. We've actually had a whole program about that here. We talked to some of the music teachers about how COVID affected them. Is that sort of back as well to sort of quote unquote normal, or are there still restrictions in place for especially like vocal music, things like that?
Yeah, no, it'll be back to normal. Like, again, I think we probably learned some things during COVID that just make some sense, that maybe we didn't think about until we had to. For instance, spreading out as much as we can.
Yeah.
So during the pandemic, that was very descriptive. At times, nobody could be within 2 meters and some of those things. But the reality is, overall, we saw less sickness other than COVID during the pandemic than we ever saw in our system in large. And that was probably because some of the things we did were just good practice. So, if we have a band room, and it makes sense to spread kids out to a degree, or versus cluster them all, maybe a good practice. But to answer your question directly, no. Like, there's no restriction saying you can't sing, you can't play a trumpet, you can't. Those are gone for now.
Those are gone.
Least. Yes.
Yeah. You never know what's going to change in the future.
Yes.
But for now.
Yes.
And so a lot of the stuff we've been talking about has been affecting more the larger schools, the Neepawa schools, Carberry, even the small schools. What about the colony schools? This is sort of, I guess, I wouldn't say unique to this area, but certainly when I talk to friends who live in other areas, they don't know what a colony school is. They don't understand how that interacts with the school system. Do you want to talk a bit about that, about the relationship there?
Yeah, we have 7 colonies in our school division, as I mentioned, and I would say our relationship.
I probably should mention this is Hutterite colonies.
Yes,
so,
Hutterian colonies. So we have 7 of them. Our relationship with our colonies is fantastic. They're very supportive of our system, and we're very respectful and supportive of their realities as well, and their culture and the way they do things. So obviously the pandemic impacted them in a different way by the nature of their living. And what I mean by that is, when my kids go to school in Neepawa, they come home at night, they eat with my family, they kind of do what we do as a family. Where in a colony setting, the kids go to school and it's really kind of like one big family. They eat together, they go to church together, they do all those things together. So I'd say the pandemic had a different impact on them, and some of our colonies took different precautions to protect their people, just like the rest of our society. Where maybe for a while they chose not to have communal eating because it just didn't seem safe or whatever.
Yeah.
So I would say the result of the pandemic on our relationship with our colonies isn't a lot different than the relationship with the rest of our society.
Huh.
There was people that maybe didn't like the regulations and people that were okay with them. And, for us, it was about keeping our kids safe, number one, following public health orders and not kind of changing the rules to ensure that we were following the same rules everybody else in society was.
And this is something that has been asked of me by someone who maybe isn't familiar. But on the Hunterian colonies, the curriculum is the same. It's not any different from what we're seeing in other schools.
Yeah, no, the curriculum is the same. The only thing that's maybe different on a few of our colonies is they do have some of their own people trained as teachers who are employed by the school division, but the curriculum is the same. Mm-hmm. And like any curriculum, the way it's taught can be nuanced a little bit to meet individual needs, but they do the Manitoba curriculum. Mm-hmm. At least any of the colonies that are part of the public system.
Right. So looking now, turning a bit now and looking at the year ahead, what are we looking at for this next year coming up? What's it going to look like in our division?
Yeah, well, I guess what I'm hoping for the next year ahead is a level of predictability for our staff, for our kids, for our families. Back to ramping up our system so that, because, let's be honest, the reality is during the pandemic, the needs of our kids, it was harder for us to meet all their needs. You alluded to things like music programs and extracurriculars. So no fault of anybody's, but the reality is some of those things were pushed to the wayside. So looking ahead from an academic and kind of planning for our kids' standpoint, we want to ramp things back up so that we can better meet the needs of our kids. For our staff, undoubtedly there was some challenges that our staff faced that, I'm not sure anybody really signed up for when they were signed up to be a teacher. They signed up to have kids in front of them and be able to meet their needs.
Right.
Not to have, 15 kids in class, 15 kids at home, teaching via Zoom, teaching kids in class. So I am hopeful that we'll get back to a little more normal practice there. And then from kind of a divisional standpoint, again, we talked about growth and we need to continue to work to plan for that growth. Mm-hmm. And that's at multi-layers. It's not just physical space. That's the piece that's obvious. But the reality is in that same time that we've grown from my time starting as superintendent to now, we've added 65 staff. About 35 teachers, 18 EAs, 2 administrators, like the list goes on. And staffing's a challenge. Mm-hmm. So we continue to look to recruit staff and hire the best people possible for our kids.
Is that mostly on the teaching end, recruiting staff has been a challenge, or just really across the board?
I think across the whole board. Right now we're seeing a challenge with bus drivers, for instance. Mm-hmm. Having enough drivers because we run 22 regular bus routes a day, and people probably don't know that, about 3,400 kilometers a day just on regular bus routes. And in a normal year, we run about 500 to 600 extracurricular trips a year. So 200 school days in a year, that's about 3 buses going to Winnipeg, to Moosomin, to wherever. And it takes a lot of manpower to run that.
Yeah.
And so I would say in all levels, whether it's computer technicians, to teachers, to educational assistants, to bus drivers, to maintenance, having enough people to fill those roles, the same challenge the hospital will face in the upcoming years, is what we've experienced for the last several years.
And that number of kilometers is staggering for the bus routes. How have gas prices affected the budgeting for the school buses? Yeah,
so obviously it has a pretty big impact because our vehicles are running lots. And, I think one thing our board has worked very hard to do is how do we allocate resources to ensure that we continue to do those things like extracurricular that matter for our kids. They cost us a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Without passing too much of that on to parents, because we know that's a challenge too. Like
Yeah.
financial struggles during the pandemic have been real. And I think that the part that's really compounded that for our school division is, as everybody knows, the ability for local taxation to occur is gone now. School divisions don't
Yeah.
have that ability anymore. So the money that we receive from the province is finite. And agree or disagree with that, that's not what I'm getting at. The reality is our board is given a sum of money from the province, and they have to decide how to allocate
Yeah.
that. And they make decisions like, what are we going to do with extracurricular versus how are we going to staff our schools to ensure our class sizes stay small, versus how are we going to maintain our facilities to ensure they're not getting run down.
Yeah.
Those are big decisions that, and everybody has their own opinion and what should be
Yeah.
a priority. And I think our board's done a fantastic job of balancing that in difficult times.
Absolutely. Now, we both know Bill 64 is off the table now, but do you think we're going to see something else come in that's trying to restructure the way our school divisions are running?
We may.
Yeah.
It was no surprise, I'll say, to myself and our school board when Bill 64 came on the table. We weren't sure of what that would look like, but our school board had been discussing what those potential things would be for probably 3 years prior to Bill 64 coming on the table. What would amalgamation, what could it look like? What are the pros and cons, and how are we going to get through that so it doesn't impact our kids?
Yeah.
So we continue to do that work, like what lies ahead. And, I think amalgamation is a prime example. That seems to be something that's cyclical. We went through a round of amalgamations once already in the province, and some school divisions were amalgamated. Beautiful Plains wasn't.
Yeah.
And then, about 10 years later, you seem to see it again. And the only thing that really stopped that bill from passing this time was public saying, you know what, bigger isn't always better.
Yeah.
And again, people can agree or disagree with that. But I'm guessing, if I were to guess, at some point, we'll probably see something back on the table again, and the discussion will happen publicly about
Yeah.
whether that's good for our kids or not.
And one of the big things we've been talking about all of today is the unique needs of each division and how they differ from each other. So I think that's one of the big driving things behind the public outcry on that one was, we know what our needs are. Would somebody else know what those are?
Yeah, and so if you look at Bill 64, the way it was originally drafted, what it would have meant to Beautiful Plains, which would no longer be Beautiful Plains, is we would have then stretched as a school division from basically Portage La Prairie
Yeah.
to the Saskatchewan border, and basically from Swan River down to Brandon.
This is a massive area.
Massive area. So obviously it's harder as a decision maker the further you get removed from directly knowing the needs of your people. That's not anybody's fault. It's just the reality of big.
Huh.
So that's something people have to decide for themselves, whether that's a good thing or
Right.
not a good thing.
Centralization, good or not?
Yeah.
I think education and the school division and how things are run is something that everyone kind of has an opinion about, especially people with children in the schools, although many who don't as well.
Yep.
What is something that you kind of want people to know about your role, about the division, about schools?
Yeah. So to your first point, yes, everybody has an opinion, and I think that's a good thing, to be honest. So you talked about parents there specifically. There's nothing I want more than a parent to care so much about their child that they have an opinion about what's happening to them, versus the alternative to
Right.
that.
Of course.
Whether you're 80 years old and live in our community, or you're 18 years old and live in our community, you're a taxpayer. So you should have an opinion. Mm-hmm. That's an okay thing. What I think is the same as any decision maker, so to speak, is I can honestly say we make decisions as a system right from our board down with the best interest of our kids in mind. We recognize that every single decision we make will be judged critically, and that's fine. And we also recognize that every single decision we make won't make everybody happy. It's not possible. So I think what I would like everybody to know is we have an open door policy. If you have a concern, come talk to us. And we'll never begrudge somebody to talk to us about their concern. That's a good thing. But the reality is we can't make everybody happy. And I referenced a limited budget, and I'm not whining or complaining about our budget. What I'm saying is, you know, for the parent whose child has to get on the bus at 7:30 in the morning and ride an hour both ways to school each day, that's brutal. We recognize that. So that might be that parent's biggest concern. For the other parent, if their child is struggling with academics, that's going to be their biggest concern. For the other parent, the programming we offer, extracurricular, and the cost of those, that's going to be their biggest concern. We have to make those tough decisions about balancing all that. And we don't take that lightly, because we recognize that every decision we make has a huge ripple effect. And you know, it's public education, so it's for all the public. And we have to meet the needs of those that are fortunate and those that are less fortunate. And we take that seriously.
So this is actually an election year. What would you say to anyone who's thinking about running for the school board?
It's a good question. And you know what, I guess I walk that line fairly carefully, because those are the people I report to. But what I can say is this: in my 26 years in beautiful Plains, I've been so fortunate to work both directly with the board as superintendent and indirectly as a staff member in other regards. And the reason I feel so fortunate is because our board is non-political. Our board genuinely cares about kids. When I go into a board meeting as the superintendent, we have 6 trustees right now, but we will have 7 elected officials, because unfortunately one of our trustees passed away during their time. But I don't know where that trustee is from. You wouldn't know. If they're elected for the community of Carberry, they're elected for the community of Neepawa, there's no politics involved in that. The question's always about, first, what impact will this have on our kids? Is it good for them? And if it's not, why are we talking about it? Second of all, this will impact our staff, and those are the people that make everything happen. So what impact will it have on them, and how can we support them? So my advice, I guess, would be is if you're running for a trustee as an elected official, my hope would be that you can stand back and look at the big picture. As a parent who's a trustee, as a grandparent who's a trustee, who is a taxpayer as a trustee, it's very easy to fall victim to your own interest. But at the end of the day, if that's what you do, that has a negative impact on all the other kids we serve. So I would hope our people that are running for this position, as with any elected position, stand back and say the decisions I make will impact everyone, not just my child or my grandchild. And if they keep that frame of mind in place, we'll be in a good spot.
Thank you. Our time is kind of running low here. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to get out there?
I don't know, last thoughts, just you know what, tough times have happened over the last couple of years, and I really feel the need to thank everyone, like our kids, our staff, our parents, our communities, our businesses. I'm thankful. People have been patient with us. They've been understanding with us. They've been supportive of us, even when maybe they didn't agree with everything that was happening. And you know, I think that says a lot about the communities we serve. We serve great communities, and that makes our job a lot easier. It makes it so we're not dealing with far out there ideas. It's just dealing with what's good for kids. So just a thanks to our communities and everybody that resides in those. A big thanks to our staff for all they've done. Thanks to our board who've supported me through all this, supported our schools, supported our communities, and we're in a good spot. And I look forward to a bright future for our school division and our kids.
Well, thank you so much again for making time for me today.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
And thank all of you for joining us. We will see you again next time.